We're going to start the meeting. Ready?
We're ready. Thank you.
Calling to order the April 24th, 2025 Urban Growth Boundary Amendment Hearing Committee meeting. And we're going to, we're locked this particular meeting, so we ask that everybody move through everything as quickly and yet through a manner. We're going to start with going around really brief introductions of the steering committee.
My name is Brian Azolis. I am a resident of town. Happy to be with me. Oh, I'm also on the budget committee and Parks Advisory Board.
Rick Redmond, I'm on the
Planning Commission. Thank you.
I've only been there my whole experience. I set the bar as low for wrestling. Get older.
Also on the planning commission?
Art Looking Ground, I'm on the planning commission.
I'm Fuller, I'm the chair of this committee. I'm also on the Urban Forestry Board. I'm Jennifer Lutz, the mayor.
Mel Peterson, I'm not on the planning committee. I'm just for the community.
So what is that's a really
Michael Britton, City Council.
Scott Woodford, community development for the City of Sisters.
And I'm Andrew Parrish, consultant health in the city.
Matthew Martin, Principal Planner with Community Development Department.
Hi, I'm Emmy. I'm the Associate Planner here with the City of Sisters.
Welcome, Morgan.
Morgan,
Are there any ex officio steering committee members who'd like to introduce themselves?
Sure. I think we're going to have a few committee members on.
Anybody on Zoom? I see Susan is there. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, yes, this is Susan Hallenberg. I'm on the UGB steering committee.
And John?
I am promoting him to panelist right now. John, if you see an invite pop up on Zoom, please accept it. Awesome. Thank you. My apologies.
And I know he was going to be on Zoom.
Who?
Abby?
Oh, okay. I'll keep an eye out for him.
Okay. Now. So, steering committee members would like to say that.
right over here. We're ready to watch.
On prior fire chief.
Okay, thank you, everybody. We're going to go into, well, got you have any other comments?
In general.
Yeah. So, following on your agenda, and oh, by the way, the minutes will add up to a little bit more than 2 hours, so we're gonna put some here and there to get everything covered. We're gonna do the overall project status report and the Deschutes County rezone update with Andrew and Scott, and also Scott dropped some printed materials for all of us. I think some of these individuals may be here to present their comments in person today, but if not, and it was not, and these just came in at the last minute, so they're not posted to the website, because the institute posting it. Hey, Scott, Andrew.
You, just like to welcome everyone here from the public and on Zoom today, and all the steering committee members coming back, and we appreciate your continued passion and persistence in sticking with us through this process. We're moving along. We still got some work to do and some important things to talk about tonight, but I'm glad you are here with us today, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. Just if you kind of in line with past practice, if you have like a question, maybe you can put your name back kind of up on end, and I would let the chair know that you have a question. And if you're on Zoom, use the raise hand button there as well. And so feel free to ask questions along the way, and then we'll have time for public comments here shortly. So we've designated time for that as well. We had proposed to maybe tweak the agenda just a little bit. The real focus of this meeting is to talk about the preferred alternatives. And sometimes, we get kind of sidetracked a little bit, not sidetracked, but we talk a lot about other things, and we don't always get the proper time to get to the meat of the agenda. So we talked about after we do an overall project status report that we take public comment, and then we talk about the draft UGB alternatives, and then we would follow up with a discussion about the Deschutes County rezone at the tail end, so that we make sure that we devote plenty of time to the meeting. Hopefully that's okay with everyone. So at this point, I think I will turn it over to Andrew for the project overview.
Right, thank you again. My name is Andrew Parrish. I work for a company called MIG, helping out with this project. So this slide showing behind me here is describing the work that we've done so far and the work that we have left. So we've been working on this UGB project for almost a year at this point. We talked about several alternatives, and we had a big public open house over the winter in the city. And now we're at the point of talking about what's come out of that, what's the preferred alternative. At this point, we have kind of an A and a B option we're going to talk through. After this point, we will be preparing findings for the city and going through an adoption process. There's also some additional area planning tests, which are, what might a street network look like, what might infrastructure need to look like in the new areas here. So that's going to be part of our work as well. We've taken the kind of estimated dates from this timeline graphic, just because there are some implications to what the city wants to do as far as timing is concerned, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. So at this point, I think we are going to have a public comment, and we'll get into some of the nitty-gritty.
Is there anybody that would like to make some public comment? I'll straight off the bat here, but I think it would help inform the discussion we have today. Okay. So if you do come up, maybe a show of hands of people who are interested in speaking. So we've got about 6 or 7. So if you guys could limit your comments to 3 minutes or so, allow everybody to have time to comment and still have us stay on our agenda. So who'd like to go first?
Just before we segue to that, I just wanted to acknowledge that Michael Frieden is here, Councilor Frieden, and Jordan Wheeler, who's on Zoom, who we did officially recognize.
Who would like to go first? Anybody? You just say your name and your address for the record. Great.
And please turn on the mic for me. I would appreciate that. Thank you.
And Walsh. Those 74 Carrot Huntington Road or still groups. With my brother today, submitted a memo to Scott and to some chairs, I guess the student motion. And we believe that is it's in support of alternative A, which includes converting other properties. Just as I say, it's to the community for what looks to everyone just a really exemplary process. That's the first thing I say. The second thing I think I want to say is that We appreciate the editorial and other. They're like cats. And I just think that's a really valuable message and perspective on this time. So that it's thanks there as well. I think, yes, we put a map that copies of the submittal. We took the liberty and made enough suggestion of what the preferred alternative might look like. It's not a big change. Like I said, I've got copies of anybody who wants to see it. That's great.
I mean, you should be able to those pages in front of you.
Yeah, that's fine. My impression, I mean, I have a leaders plan of situation. It seems to be the case that the process as it's structured can allow for inclusion of things like constricted area, like garden meadow. And I don't know if people are seeing the pictures from this one, but it's spectacular, flood, super beautiful. And we've heard of people around meadow suggest or ask for it to be protected. Having run upon it, I really support that full. And I guess maybe the last thing I want to say is that consistent with certainly the Black Hats mission. Even though we are interested parties, really, I speak in support of sisters trying to keep access to the potential Mackenzie Meadows Village 50 acres. And there's a new state law, relatively new, Senate Bill 1537. And there appear to be some really powerful tools therein. And I think it's new enough and untested enough. I think it's not been widely read. I would encourage anybody or anything in this to read it thoroughly. Specifically, section 58 provides some really powerful opportunities for the city. So thanks so much.
Thank you.
Everybody, thank you so much. My name is Rima Gibbett. I live at 18557 Main Drive. I also am a long-term resident, went to Sisters High School, and now have taught, a privilege of teaching there for the last 25 years. And I just wanted to speak this specifically to the Mackenzie Meadows property. I'm not sure if this point has been brought up, but I really wanted to speak to the educational value of the Trout Creek Conservation Area, which is conservation easement right adjacent to Mackenzie Meadows property north of the high school, south of Tollgate. It's 160 acres. It's a protected area. It has some really special organisms in it. Penicillin is one of them, which you don't know what it is. It's a special plant that only lives here in Central Oregon, and specifically right here in Sisters and out to Camp Sherman. That's it in the world. And it's something that our students get to learn about. I'm saying that because that land has incredible educational value. And I just want to recognize that if you were to decide, if the state were to change their zoning, or the county were to change the zoning on that property, and then that was annexed in, it would have a very significant impact on the ecological value of that land. Right now, it's continuous forest all the way through, and it would create an island from what is continuous forest. Students it was formed in 2003 as far as the easement land was, and we've been using it for education for the last 15 years. And I don't know if you were ever about to go out there or not, but I estimate 1,500 to 2,000 different students have learned out there, developed a sense of place with this area, and it's part of their kind of sisters education. Developing that land adjacent would impact that experience for our community. Also, developing that land would put further pressure of recreation on the Trout Creek Conservation Area to a point that I don't know that it could actually be serving the conservation part of it like it's meant to. I also just wanted to throw out a vision for that land developing, and I think would encourage urban sprawl. And it's something that I believe people move to Sisters. When I ask people, why are you here? They say it's for the community, the peace, and the nature. And by developing untouched, well, it's not untouched, but developing forest, that takes away from that nature. And it is urban sprawl. And I don't think we can call it anything else. And so to recognize that as a decision, if that's the way you choose to go. I have a vision of maybe a collaboration. I think somebody said it in the nugget of know how it could happen, but collaboration to make that land ultimately a community resource. Right now it's private. I mean, they've been graciously letting people go out there. And if you look at trail cams, we put trail cams on the high school property, and so many people every day walk through that land. And it's because they need that land for their sense of peace, their health, their well-being. And so what a cool vision to just collaborate and create like permanent open space there. So that would be my message. And I really appreciate your time. And I also want to recognize this is not a black and white issue. This is very nuanced and so complex. And I really appreciate all of you working for it solving. Thank you.
Thank you.
Earl Stevens, a lot of ways it's probably the Glacier Drive and Sisters. For these comments, I've also had a public policy specialist for the last 35 years, so I study every day a lot of what's going on in the world. And I just have one recommendation for the committee today. I strongly advise you to go back and talk to Portland State about the forecasts that are underlying a lot of this work. I do that because there's a lot of things going on in the world that are going to affect where people go, whether they go, and where they, how they get there, and what they can afford when they get there. An example of what's going on is interest rates are highly unlikely to go down, and in fact, they're more likely to go up, so that the country can finance its new debt from its deficit. So that's kind of an underlying thing that is not going to help any development be more affordable. NAHB came out this week with a report saying that the tariffs on Chinese steel are likely to add $11,000 to the cost to a builder of building a home. Of course, it'll end up as $13,000 or $14,000 in mortgage. So a lot of these things are going on right now. It's hard to predict what they're going to be, but I think a lot of people seem to be reacting by not doing much, by not going anywhere, not doing anything, because the uncertainties are becoming somewhat overwhelming. I don't know that Portland State is taking all of this stuff into account, but I do know that the data you're probably relying on is at least 2 or 3 years old. And if it's 2 or 3 years old, we already see the Sisters 5.5% growth over the last 20 years. It's actually leveled out starting in 2021. I would want to know why that is. Not that I'm not saying it's going to be the future, or it could go down, it could go up, but you want to know why it's doing what it's doing. I think I just strongly recommend you go back and forth with the state before you make any final decisions to find out if your planning is really undergirded by something resembling reality in the future. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Ross. I'm on 1055 East Horseback Trail here in Sisters. Thanks for convening this process. It's been very interesting following along, and the engagement's been inspiring. I'm troubled that the city might exclude some highly desirable and buildable land from the UGB expansion close to the Sisters Airport. I believe this is wrong-headed, will further entrench and embed an existing incompatible use in our community. The fact that current operations at the airport are potentially influencing future growth decisions today are indeed telling of current issues. Sisters is increasingly becoming a playground for the privileged few, and its future growth and livability should not be unduly influenced and molded at the expense of the many. The land near the airport is clear of vegetation, flat, close to existing city infrastructure with water, sewer, and power, convenient and central. Building further out from town would require further additional capital expenditures to extend services and roads. This would be fiscally irresponsible and unfair to the taxpayer. As a community undergoing a UGB expansion, we are called to think out 20 years from now. How does the Sisters Airport fit into that vision of livability? Do we want more noise and lead pollution? Do we want increasing risks of planes crashing into homes? I understand that the city does not control private property. However, in the short term, the solution will consider restricting airport growth, adopting noise ordinances, and seeking a voluntary flood agreement for noise and lead abatement. For the long term, the city should enter into talks with the owners of the airport to acquire the property and seek to close the facility for the sake of all residents and our quality of life. I understand this is controversial, but wanted to speak on this today. Now, please incorporate the lands near the airport into the UGB expansion. And as an immediate next step, begin addressing the elephant in the room directly. Further accommodation of the airport today, I believe, would be a huge mistake for the livability and peace and the nature of this community. Thank you.
Thank you.
Everyone, Peggy Dixon. I live at 14567 Crossroads Loop in the Sisters. I teach biology, sustainable agriculture, and other science classes at Sisters High. But I'm speaking today for myself, my two children, and their peers. And to be clear, I'm not representing the school district, but shows the wrong picture. I've been following this conversation around including Mackenzie Meadows land in the UGB expansion since last fall, and through that process, I've really come to appreciate and trust the process, and so I appreciate that all you're doing. However, one point I have not heard come up, or maybe it hasn't been said loudly enough, is the impact of developing that land on the educational experience of our students in the community. Each school year, biology students spend approximately 20 days in the Trout Creek Conservation Area with approximately 100 students per year. That equates to about 2,000 user days per year. And that's just biology students alone. The TCCA is used by upper classers for the IE program, special projects, and collaborations between the high schoolers and lower grades. For example, the last spring, the sustainable ag class met kindergartners and the TCCA to teach them about native pollinators and their role in our food production. These types of collaborations make lasting impact on students. The common question I'm approached with every morning before biology class is, are we going outside today? And it's easy to make assumptions about teenagers that they want to go outside so they can socialize or goof off or get out of prep work in classroom. Instead, when I ask them why they want to go outside, they say it's peaceful. I just really like my study site. I was hoping to see a red cross field today, or I just like the work you do out there more. They like being out there because it engages them in a different and deeper way. It challenges them to work together, making friends and look closely at their surroundings. And our students and sisters lean towards challenge and connection to the outdoors. I want this for my 5-year-old daughter and my 3-year-old son and their peers. I want them to know that outdoor education is valued in their community. And I have deep concerns that developing the into the Eastern Trout Creek Conservation Area will have major consequences and they could impact that student experience. Lining the east side with high density housing will change the character and the ethic of that land, that special place our community can preserve for future generations. And I really do believe that land is more valuable to our community as forest. I just wish that you can consider those thoughts as you move forward in your process. Thank you. Monica Thomasy, 527 South First Street in Sisters. And I am a retired research program leader on the U.S. Forest Service. I'm speaking on issues that I led and managed for many years in forest ecology, climate change, landscape ecology, and fire research. So the Eastern Cascades forest ecosystems have experienced increased drought since the early 1990s, and the likelihood of wildfire is predicted to increase. Yet in recent years, development around Sisters has encroached further into the drying forested areas. The facts are well established that wet and moist areas play a critical role in preventing, minimizing the spread of wildfire, reducing the severity of the fire, providing refugia, and thereby allowing ecosystem recovery post-fire. When vegetation in moist areas are degraded, more fuel for wildfire is created. When homes are built with wood and landscaped with wood products, the stage is set for fire to finish off the community within 20 minutes. Avoidance of known risk is a planning strategy supported by the decades of wildland and interface research to minimize the probability of catastrophe. Two things a town located in Eastern Cascades forest ecosystem can do, town like Sisters, are don't eliminate wet and moist holding areas, moisture holding areas, and don't replace forests with fuel laden structures. The responsible thing to do for the Sisters community is to sustain hydrologic functions and ecosystem services regarding wildfire risk prevention, adaptation, and resilience. To do so otherwise would be to knowingly promote the likelihood and severity of future fires in Sisters, putting people's homes, properties, and lives at greater risk. So for the sake of Sisters at large, please do not allow the limited wet and moist areas to be included in the urban boundary. My recommendation in the bigger picture of land use planning in and around Sisters is that all parcels that hold moisture in the ground or in the vegetation, and this includes that Trout Creek, Mackenzie Meadows property, they should not be altered in ways that destroy or degrade the structure, function, and processes of these moisture storing watersheds. I recommend finding permanent protection for ephemeral, intermittent, and permanent wet and moist areas, either from a land trust or city or county or state or federal governments or any other entity that would commit to sustaining the hydrologic processes of these lands. I'd apply for grants to attract more beavers into the Sisters landscape. This would all be for the protection of lives and structures in and around Sisters. So I'd seek land exchanges for more appropriate urban growth choices that avoid the wet areas, places that east of Sisters, away from drying forests and away from permanent ephemeral intermittent wet ecosystems. The Trout Creek Mackenzie Meadows parcel could be the first in line for such a smart growth land exchange. Thank you.
Thank you.
Wattenberg, Minister 15 Orkney Court, not in the city, but I'm right next door, where the preferred alternative is targeting the meadow. And a lot of discussion about the meadow. My primary observation is I've not heard of a growth plan for the city, what you would be doing with all of this land once you bring it into the growth boundary. I think that significantly affects which choices you make, which things you bring in, Mackenzie Meadow or otherwise, but to not really be doing these two in parallel to a little bit remiss to me. If you're trying to bring in hundreds of acres, including the meadow, what are you going to do with it once you have it in? Because that should help guide your alternatives. If you don't need the meadow, don't bring it in. I'm all for you bringing it in, protect it, makes good use of it. It's got conversations, and that's not pertinent today. The other thing I will bring up is this whole fire risk assessment of all the properties. So I live just on the edge of the meadow, just past T-Ham's property, past the airport, back in the meadow. I'm in a very high risk category according to the state. I've submitted my appeal to that rating, and apparently the state has put all of that on hold right now until that was about 3 weeks ago. Some legislative session was over with, and they were going to possibly throw the whole thing out. What I don't get is thinking about expanding Sisters to the west into timber, specifically McKinsey Meadow. My hometown is Greenville, California. Look at the Dixie Fire in 2021, burned almost 1 million acres, burned my hometown in about an hour. Sisters does not stand any chance. If there's ever a fire to the west and the wind kicks up, just get out of the way. You can't cut enough trees and protect enough homes that the fire will not sweep all the way through the city. And to simply aggravate that by building out to the west into the timber areas, McKinsey Meadows, as far as I understand, is kind of a scrub pine, juniper, tollgate, and crossroads already are incredibly high risk. You can't cut enough trees out there to prevent them from burning. They almost get back and be in fire. They just got very lucky the winds calmed down. But they should have burned. I can speak ad nauseum about the risk of fire. I've fought it as a dozer operator my entire life, and you cannot get in front of a fire when this starts. What are you thinking about expanding the city to the west? You may not like what you see out here, but that scrub brush can be cut and mitigated a whole lot easier than taking out an entire forest just to say that now you've got a fire safe community. And most of downtown Sisters is going to burn in a huge hurry. All your beautiful pine trees, where you leave, the faster it burns. And there's a crown fire. There is nothing you can do. With my compass. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Jim Greer. I live at 527 South First Street. I certainly wasn't planning on being here until about 10 minutes before we were going to start today. I have been lax in being really connected to the process, other than what I talked to some of the city people about the process that was being demonstrated at farmers market and so forth. And I got an idea that the city really wanted to do this urban growth boundary expansion. But I just looked through all the information that's on the website for tonight's meeting, and I've seen a real lack of supporting information for the need for this urban growth boundary. You haven't stated any real way to meet the qualifications of Senate Bill 1537. I'm kind of wondering why we're pushing an expansion when we have a lot of open land right here within the urban growth boundary. We've also had a tremendous amount of building within the city in the last 7 years since I moved here. I'm one of those people that moved here because I love the community. I love the quiet, and I love the wildlife. I've been a wildlife biologist my whole career for 32 years. And to see what's happened in just Deschutes County is just amazing. You know what Deschutes County did when they took the wildlife mitigation plan for wintering deer in critical winter range that was going to be developed. And the county kicked it down the road and said, no, we're not going to help the deer out. They're 50% below what they've been in the last 30 years. Expansion and development is one of the biggest impacts of fish and wildlife you can have. And that's what's happening here in Sisters already. And in your pros and cons of the information you sent out to your group today, the cons are very clearly concerned about environmental degradation. And as an earlier spokesperson mentioned, what are you going to do with this land? Do you have a mitigation plan? For those lots that are over 10 acres, how are you going to zone them? I mean, I can't comment on whether your proposal, your best proposal for us is good or bad if I don't know what's going to happen to it or how you're going to develop it over time. So I guess it gets down to, don't you think we've done enough to date? Don't you think we've done enough in the last 5 years? Again, we don't know if we can even meet that critical issue of creating housing for people that don't make more than 50% of what's required for their income to meet this particular requirements of 1567. So my two concerns are process. Your identification of need for this expansion seems to be lacking. And the environmental concerns that you heard from other people already tonight. The development is great, Sisters is a great community, and you all do good work. But I think we could wait for the next round of opening up the urban growth boundary, because it's going to happen again. This Senate Bill 1567 is kind of a one-shot deal. And I think we're rushing into it without really looking at the long term. So give that some thought and let's get prepared for the next round of expansion. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else here who would like to comment? Is there anybody on Zoom who would like to make a comment from the public?
Okay, anyone who's attending over Zoom, if you'd like to provide comment at this point in time, please use the raised hand button. Okay, I see no hands. We can move on.
So we have a hearing comment from Bill Willis. For 5 minutes that we had planned ahead of time. And very apropos, someone just mentioned something about housing and affordable housing and amount of income relative to housing costs. So please go ahead, Bill. Thank you.
So, I really appreciate the comments. And I can relate to all of them. But I'm gonna move the context from dirt to people. And, basically, I've created a mug and anyone that, this statement resonates to and wants to wake up to morning coffee that the statement, please take them. Sisters pathway to housing must be fair and equitable to everyone. 30% affordable and workforce housing is pivotal for the long-term stability. And what's happened in Sisters, I was at this table 20 years ago when we put into effect our current land use policy. And we had no clue at that time you could buy a house for $120,000 for Colgate. We had no clue the average home price would be between $800,000 and $850,000. We had no clue that our essential workers would be priced out of the market. And we had no clue we'd have 108 people living in forests. So, you know, what I'm trying to bring to the steering committee is reality. And that reality is that if you look at a DOS report, and this is to Charlie's point, the current report, this was done in December of 2024 for the state of Oregon, says our community needs 36% of all future housing to be affordable and 24% of all future housing to be a workforce. 645 affordable units, 437 workforce units. This is the best statistical data we have at this time. And we're not going to get there unless we take a huge step. And even with that huge step, it's not going to affect the 108 people living out in the forest because they can't afford to rent in this community at this point. So I believe the right thing for the community is to focus on a builder developer who will build affordable housing and commit to it up front as part of annexation. That is, we don't come in unless we deliver 30% workforce and affordable housing. And I want to yield just for 60 seconds to my friend Peter Hoover, Executive Director of Sisters Habitat. I think that's something privilege to say.
Thanks, Bill. Good evening, Peter Hoover, Sisters Habitat, 221 South Ash Street. Echoing Bill's comments, you have a very difficult decision that you have to make. I think everyone is aware of that, but I acknowledge that too. You have many solid competing interests, many solid competing reasons to include or exclude various areas. But I would also like to echo Bill's sentiments about bringing the human element into it. The projection that Bill cited from DAS, the number of homes that are needed in Sisters is significant. I can tell you that I can anecdotally, not anecdotally, tell you firsthand experience from Sisters Habitat, the demand that we have for the very few homes that we're able to build within the Sisters area. Affordable homes, what does that mean? That means homes that if it's a Habitat home are going to be priced between $180,000 and $235,000 versus the average or the median home price right now of $717,000.
Affordable homes are needed by the people that we all depend upon here in Sisters. School bus drivers, veterinary techs, tank staff, x-ray technicians, chefs, bakers, retail workers, baristas, HVAC service sets, wildland firefighters, teachers, auto mechanics, grocery store stockers, nurses. How do I know that? Many of those are Habitat homeowners. That's how I know that. Graduates of Sisters High School who want to come back here and live and can't because they're priced out. That's a human element. Affordable homes don't just happen. It starts with willing and committed landowners to the affordable housing process. Sisters Habitat will have no land after January of 2027. We will have expended everything that we have, and we are priced out of the infill land that's in the city. You have a lot of considerations to weigh. Please include in your thoughts and your recommendations the people element, because that will decide who gets to live here.
I just have 1 minute more experiments. I'm sorry, I know it's speed up, but I wanted to comment on Trout Creek. In developing Trout Creek area, the state mandates 100-foot setback on each side of Trout Creek. So Trout Creek is going to be unaffected by this property, with the exception of 2 culverts that go over it to get to the rear housing. I think I want you to consider concept B for 3 reasons. One is, I think concept B takes in the best lands, including to sell OT and kind of clean, empty land that can be built out fairly expediently and is reasonably close to utility. Number 2, our commitment, and we will present this to the cities, we will build 36 Habitat homes in cooperation with Peter. Peter will build 36 Habitat homes in cooperation with us, excuse me. And then we're going to build 12 special needs houses as part of 120 affordable homes that we will deliver. And then finally, to the point of cost of taxpayers infrastructure. We have infrastructure on the property now, 2 12-inch water mains, 2 sewer mains, and 2 power mains. There'll be 0 cost to our community because all the infrastructure, thanks to the city of Sisters, is 2 and 3. I think we got to show ourselves now.
This is kind of discussion for later. I thought you were just going to talk about housing.
I'm sorry.
This,
I should have been looking up. You're trying to start.
Yeah, I think we should.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Bill. I'm gonna go into the draft UGB preliminary preferred alternative. And Andrew and Matt are gonna lead us through.
All right, thank you. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the thinking behind these preferred alternative concepts, and we'll start with going back to the land need summary that we prepared about a year ago, identifying the categories of land that are needed based on the long-term planning that the city's been undertaking, going back to the comprehensive plan back in 2020, and recent housing and employment opportunities work since then. So there's an overall need for about 168 acres of residential land. There was a modest surplus of higher density residential land in the city based on those forecasts, and that is basically things that are already downtown. We think there's enough land there with the new mixed use designations that the city put together as part of the comprehensive plan. There's a need for new employment land, about 50 acres, and we talked about schools and parks. So the elementary school estimated at about 15 acres and 19 acres of parks. Per the city's recently updated parks master plan. So we're talking about 260-ish acres overall of land. So when we take a look at some of the developability numbers, there's a lot of assumptions that go into that about which houses are expected to remain and what's considered vacant, what is developable on things adjacent to wetlands and floodways and things like that. But some of these land uses such as parks, maybe that is an appropriate use for a more natural area that floods sometimes. So maybe some of that acreage could be met on some of those natural resource lands. Yeah, whereas residential units would probably not be appropriate. So there's some flex in these numbers, I guess is what I'm saying, depending on where exactly the boundary is drawn and what those land uses are proposed to be. So we have these two preferred concepts. We've been directed by this group, by planning commission, by city council to kind of think about what a successfully rezoned McKenzie Meadows Village property would mean in this context. And we also have that priority one land that we're required to look at first by the state, which includes everything kind of in teal on this map. Both of these concepts that we put together, they incorporate the best performing areas based on those goal 14 factors that we talked about over the course of a few meetings. Input from this group and planning commission, city council, and broader public. We're always getting lots of letters of and feedback from folks. So we think that this is a good set of choices. The land that we've included is all pretty developable and would be an appropriate addition, I think, for the most part for the city. So we've talked about existing subdivisions a lot with this group. And so I just included this slide to show that the concepts we're looking at, they contain either some or all of 3 subdivisions that the county has on file. So that's Barkley Meadows in the deep blue here. And it's kind of got 2 prongs to it, kind of a north and south prong. Barkley Meadows first edition, which is the larger piece in green to the east, which includes the meadow that folks have been talking about, and then Crosswind Landings, which is adjacent to the airport and has some kind of finger homes and a large open space that is part of that subdivision. The other subdivisions we've been talking about, they're shown in gray. They're not part of the preferred concepts. We don't expect to propose to include them. So we've broken down the area remaining that we're looking at into these sub areas. So we have McKenzie Meadows Village property on the west side. We've got maybe going from south to north on the east side. We've got properties along Highway 126 that we call the Highway 126 properties. We've just kind of lumped them in here to everything south of Wedges Creek. There's the inner northeast properties shown here in kind of purple. And then we have those 3 subdivisions we've talked about, Barkley Meadows first edition, Crosswind Landing. And I think there's one parcel that is not part of Crosswind Landing, but is still colored green here. It's generally in the same region vicinity. So I'm going to walk through some initial pros and cons that we see for each of these sub areas. This is not an exhaustive list, and we want to hear your opinions about whether this is the right set of things to be thinking about, whether there's more, or whether we've gotten some things wrong. So these inner northeast properties, you can see at the top right, there's a little set map showing what we're talking about here. But this is almost 90 acres. We're estimating about 65 of that to be developable based on keeping a couple of the homes that are there and some of the natural resources kind of on the far eastern side. These are mainly vacant properties. There isn't a lot there currently. They're close to existing infrastructure. They're close to city amenities. They're large. They're generally over 10 acres each. One of the potential cons is their proximity to the Sisters Eagle Airport. You talk with airport officials about, height restrictions, which shouldn't matter too much this far out, but also use kind of restrictions or preferences that they have. They don't like to have new residential development really close to the airport. But things like employment uses they think are more appropriate. Going a little bit south to the Highway 126 properties, this is about 85 gross acres, about 47 of which we think is developable, again, based on existing homes. And it might be the case that some of these homes would be redeveloped into a new kind of lighting pattern should these things develop. So we have a couple of early assumptions we've made there, so that number could change. But these properties have highway access on 126. Some of these homes are lower value, so they'd be more likely to actually be developed if you were to include the area. And there's a significant amount of vacant land on most of these parcels. Wetch's Creek is sort of a pond because it'd be difficult to get new roads across it. It's a scenic kind of waterway, and so it's difficult to get new roads and bridges built across it, and it's not a totally vacant area, so we've listed that as a pond as well. Looking at the Crosswind Landing subdivision, it's about 23 acres. It's got homes on it currently, and there's a large open space tract that is undeveloped, and the CCNRs, the covenants and restrictions for that subdivision, do kind of anticipate eventual inclusion in the urban growth boundary. It says this will remain an open space tract until unless and until the city sisters includes it in the urban growth boundary, at which point maybe it can be developed with something. But it is a kind of airport oriented subdivision. These are homes that can get your airplane all the way to the tarmac there. There's CCNRs currently, and this is an area that's very close to the airport, so there's development restrictions about how you can use nearby that we have to work through. Barkley Meadows, again, the kind of blue north and south parcels, north and south of that Crosswind Landing subdivision. These are there's some that are quite vacant. There's some that have existing homes on them. The lots are very large. It's next to the airport, and the existing homes are the main cons that we've identified here. I've broken Barkley Meadows first edition into kind of the south section and the north section. They seem fairly different. They're accessed differently through different roads. So this is the south section, about 110 acres, maybe 70 or so considered developable given the existing units on site. They're very large lots, 10 to 20 acres. They're near existing construction services. There's a variety of different owners, and this is kind of only a portion of a subdivision, so it might be a consideration. Should the city expand the urban growth boundary to just a portion of the subdivision, or would the full amount make more sense? Would be easier to get folks to agree to. That's kind of a concern, and the property is fairly high value as well. So the north part of Barkley Meadows first edition, about 103 gross acres, maybe 50 developable acres, largely due to the floodplain and wetland kind of area that I believe we've shown it in this red hatching and all of our maps. That exact line through development will probably need to get a wetland delineation, and the county would work with folks about floodplain mapping. So that's kind of a refinement that would likely occur through development. But these are large lots, and the creek corridor is an opportunity for parks and trails, and folks have talked about wouldn't it be nice to have a contiguous off-street kind of trail system that goes through there. We heard that a lot in the open house, but we also heard, we need to protect this land from development, and maybe bring in the urban growth boundary isn't the way to do that. And again, this is only a portion of a subdivision, and there's a variety of different owners here. So working with a variety of folks in the HOA might be kind of an issue. And then we have the McKinsey Meadows Village property, 58 acres. It's a vacant site. It's under single ownership. It's close to existing infrastructure, schools, maintenance. It's got a rezoning process underway, so the timing of that is uncertain. And we got some comments today saying, we should also note that the drainage, the stream and natural kind of resources are being developed. So with all of that said, we put together two concepts for discussion here. the concept A is about 268 gross acres. It includes what you see in the black dashed line here. So a portion of the property is along Highway 126, the southern portion of Barkley Meadows First Edition, the inner northeast properties, and the southern portion of that Barkley Meadows subdivision there. This is a single contiguous site. Maybe it's easier to kind of plan that way to have one unit. But this we think is a good set of all the best performing properties that we've been looking at this whole time. And then here is concept B, slightly smaller in terms of gross acreage, 240 acres. It includes McKinsey Meadows Village property, those inner northeast properties, Crosswind Landing, and both kind of sections of Barkley Meadows. So I suppose the main kind of differences between these two concepts are one of the driving factors perhaps is having land that is more suitable for employment uses because that is part of the need that we're trying to meet. So it's not just residential, it's new commercial areas or new manufacturing industrial uses, things other than residential. So having highway access might be a good amenity for non-residential uses, for employment uses. So the land along Highway 126 here might be appropriate for that. Might be other pieces of land as well. We haven't done a painting the colors on the map kind of exercise yet, because that generally comes after we say this is more or less the land that we're looking at, and do a more kind of refined exercise after that. So in concept B, this includes more of the land that's adjacent to the airport. Maybe that's where employment uses are focused in concept B here, rather than along Highway 126. So with all of that, we'd like to have you discuss with us. Do you have any more pros and cons for each of those sub areas? Go back through those maps or look at some other information that we have available. What do you think about these different preferred alternatives concepts, and should we do any adding other sub areas or subtracting sub areas to for alternative sort of options? Turn it over to staff.
Here's some questions. We're going to start.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. Mind clarifying. What is a regulation? What would be a recommendation?
So in terms of strict regulations, there are height limits if you're actually building something next to the runway. And they have what they call a conical surface that extends from the edge of the runway, and it's basically don't build a tall building right next to the runway. Going on a little further than that, maybe a few hundred feet, it extends into this area here. They have a list of incompatible uses, and it's not as bright a line, but they say, yeah, these are a use of concern, and residential uses, parks, stadiums, like things that get a lot of people or new neighborhoods next in vicinity of the airport is a concern to them because of potential future noise issues, just like how good of a neighbor can it need to be if they're an active airport, and also a little bit of safety concern, I think, on their end, but they indicated that they can work with you to figure out what makes sense, and if there's any kind of mitigating things that you can do in the design phase.
I'm just going to add to that. What we heard is that it's not a hard and fast rule of their guidelines, model standards, except with the exception of the FAA standards. So there's recommendations for best land use practices around the airport. If you were to encroach into those areas too much and kind of compromise those, it could jeopardize the FAA funding, grant funding for the airport. One of the recommendations.
Maybe that big of an issue, was supposed to be a huge tank right next to the airport. And I think
Yeah, so I have a question about kind of thinking about the two alternatives and the access. So like in the option A, I can see there's a lot of contiguous land or it's like touching the current UGB. Whereas in the second alternative, you add more of those properties that aren't currently touching the UGB, and how might that affect, people are like, people applying for annexation, they have to wait till the neighboring properties. So kind of what are the pros of having the Crosswood and Barkley Meadows versus the South Barkley Meadows first edition in terms of like, independence of annexation and access to those lands.
I mean, from a technical perspective, part of the runway of the airport is currently inside the urban growth boundary, so those properties are actually adjacent, but to get like utilities and access, you probably need to be able to go through the airport itself, so that could be kind of a concern. Like phasing could happen differently in this situation for those properties, but they are it's all still pretty close to the existing city, I would say.
So with the options. So with the options, the original four we're working off of just 247 to 264 acres, that's kind of usable acres, right? We discussed in the past that swath might be bigger because of parts of the, properties that can't be used as floodplain or they've already been developed. So I'm just wondering, big picture, is there any value, and I'm just saying out loud here, is there any value in kind of drawing the proposals bigger and then whittling them down versus starting small and adding on? In your experience, is there one way or the other better?
I would say, and maybe Matt Hasty, who's on the call as well, can add a little bit of information, but I would say that it depends on the whether there are people who want to be included or are glad to be excluded. Maybe one way to put it, but if you it might be more difficult to at the very end remove a property that would say, oh well, we do need a little bit more land, so we'll add this section here. But I don't have a great sense of what the strategic implications might be. You do have to justify to the state the expansion that you request, and so I think at the end of the day, the numbers need to add up.
Yeah, do you want me to weigh in at all there? Can you hear me okay there?
Yeah, great.
All right, great. Yeah, I would reiterate a little bit what Andrew said. The numbers don't have to be exact. And if there's, for instance, let's say there's areas that don't sort of count towards that net developable area because there are areas within natural resource areas that maybe you want to protect or conserve their natural resource values, and you think that could be an opportunity for the area within the city, and they maybe contribute to parks or open space, but they exceed the identified need for park and open space. I think you could maybe make a case there. So I think those numbers are not, they're not super precise, and I think you could look at identifying a larger area, and certainly we need to be thinking about enough net developable area to meet the needs that we talked about, including the park area is not so much net developable but used for that purpose. But you probably, as Andrew said, you do need to justify how much land you're bringing in, and so it's going to need to be reasonably close to meeting that net need that we've identified. So hopefully that helps, but I know that's a pretty squishy answer. Sorry about that.
Just one of the reasons that we put together this set of maps to include, for example, more than just what's under the boundary here of those Highway 1.6 properties. Maybe if there's, if at the end of the day, we've identified all the park need we have and say, we do actually need another X number of acres for one of these uses that's appropriate there. Maybe we can add 1 or 2 more parcels along that kind of yellow southern Highway 26 area. So we tried to identify this larger block that we're working with, and we think in each of these situations, there's you could add a little bit here, take away here, but we're honing in on what we hope is right.
I'd like to say that I'm really interested in the Highway 126 properties because of their access to 126 itself. I'm not really concerned too much about trying to cross White's Creek in another area. I think that the access to the highway itself can be they're self-sustaining in regard to transportation. There is obviously a big side drive which has a little bridge that is we probably don't want to even refer to it anyway, because it's already probably near its max traffic area. That's just another neighborhood. But the thing I really like about those 126 properties is it brings White's Creek more into town. And I think City of Sisters has demonstrated over the years how much we love White's Creek. There was a time, not even 25 years ago, where it didn't even have full flow. And being in the city means you have a little more control over it. And dare I say that we're probably better than the county at conserving what's around us than they are. So I'm really interested in getting even more of those Highway 126 properties and maybe not considering as much of the crosswinds and the north side of Park and Meadow, because I think the 126 properties have those conservation areas that we can make around White's Creek and keep that sweet. But also the frontage property on 126, which could be multi-use or where businesses could flourish right on the highway, much like downtown, and kind of create almost an extension of downtown just a little bit. It's never going to be 100% connected, but I really think that that property would be really, really useful along the frontage of 126, where you could have mixed use and a little more of business and retail. Probably not light industrial down there for sure, but I think that land would be very nice coming in from the east and seeing that develop over the years, because there'll be more business opportunities and retail opportunities like that. I know we don't need a whole lot of more downtown commercial, but at the same time, if you have a strip of downtown commercial, much like there could be, there's going to be around the Woodlands, there's going to be businesses between those houses and Barclay Drive. I think there's just a lot of opportunity for a lot of different things there. I think that's, romantic in a way, 20 years down the road to see a little bit of an extension of the downtown and some cutesy stuff. Thank you.
I'd like to highlight Susan has her hand up.
Thanks. Yeah, just to sort of, I guess, tag a little bit onto what Michael said. I mean, I do think kind of expanding and maybe encompassing that whole Highway 126 section would be good. I was kind of wondering whether you actually needed, Barclay Meadows first edition as a way for it to be contiguous to the other space, or it seems like since you have the highway access and you'd be contiguous to the current UGB, you wouldn't necessarily need the Barclay Meadows first edition. My concern with that is I do think there's some high value homes in there. And so from a practical standpoint of being able to, get the type of density you're looking to get, my thought would be that might be challenging in that particular area. That was all I had.
I want to echo also what Michael said with the 126 property. Because part of our guidelines is we need to grab 53.6 acres of employment land, and some of those outreaching areas are the potential employment land where adjacent to 126 would be. And again, crossing White's, we don't need to cross White's there because we can come back in, and there really doesn't need to be a connection between Walking Meadows and the 126 properties.
I'll say that the,
Oh, I was gonna say, I do want us to think about connecting to 126, thinking about fire safety and getting people out of their neighborhoods and on the highway so they can get out sisters when the fires come. Hopefully it's a long time from now, but I think we need to be thinking about infrastructure to get people out of these neighborhoods at times, because that's something that we should be thinking about to be a firewise community. I don't really think about or like doing traffic planning, things like that, but I think connecting those neighborhoods as we expand and they are hopefully dense, they need to be able to get on the highways.
oh, no. Oh, I was just gonna say that kind of the opposite, but the value of land adjacent to the airport, for commercial use, I think was very valuable. I mean, if you think of, just for an example, the Bend Airport, you have a lot of commercial light industrial just right along the airport out there. Because, nobody except, a plane really wants to live right next to an airport, but those light industrial spaces there have been a really good fit. So I was thinking, that might be a really good place to put it. Particularly light industrial up along there. There already is some up there. And also, I did have even from the airport, I did have a question of why we aren't including the triangle of property in the airport. Oh, it is already in the city.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
It's all there.
I wanted to also agree with the idea about developing along 126, that opportunity comes to pass. And I also want to echo what Hannah said, and we really need to have throughways for traffic. There's gonna be more and more people living around the airport and this part of town. It's already, even though the roundabout just went in, there's already some time limits. Back up to get on 20, and we're not even in NBC tour season yet. When I look at both of these concepts, what jumps out to me is that I would really love it if we could weave into our planning right now a way to grab the meadow and somehow secure it for parkland or preserve. Not to be building high density or low density, but just to preserve it. And if you had access from Highway 26 for the public, you could start little pathway to there, paved or not. It could be a very primitive kind of experience going down the watershed there. A lot of times it'll be more dry, but right now, you walk over there, there's these signs everywhere that says no trespassing. And it's very beautiful to look at, but you can't really experience. If you're on the far side of the meadow and look back for the Three Sisters, it's just an amazing view. And it would be nice for also all the reasons people have brought up about Mackenzie Meadow property to preserve while we can influence it, these wetlands and this wildlife corridor aspect of that side, rather than leave it up to fate. And I'm sure that doing this in any way would require a lot of different entities and agencies working together to try to find a common ground to do it. But that's how I just treat that grew up. And that's why Notorious River and that whole area around in Sherman is so beautiful, is because so many people work very, very hard to make it happen. And that one go.
I think I do want to come back to what Susan said earlier, just in the comparison between concept A and B. This
this 90 acres approximately, that are in concept A around the southern half of Berkeley Meadows. Those are very, very high value properties that are unlikely to be urbanized very efficiently at all. And I do like the points that have been raised about the properties that are immediately adjacent to Highway 26, for the enjoyable commercial element of it, not for the terrifying fire access of it. But given that that is most readily that if we were to excise the south end of Berkeley Meadows, retain the Highway 26 properties, Mackenzie Meadows, then would be the most obvious place to get that back complete to 50 to 60-ish acres that we need. And I may be jumping the gun on the agenda here, so bring me by in, but I was wondering if we could talk through the status of the Mackenzie Meadows zone change. And then contemplate whether or not it's appropriate at this point to start considering priority 3 lands as a potential expansion area. If only because the challenge again with multiple property owners in concept A is the risk that we're not going to be urbanizing within the time frame that we actually need in order to meet our housing plan.
Before we go to the end of the zoning. Does anybody else have general questions or comments? Go ahead.
I just had a general, the racing between A and B.
You mind getting by your mic so it can be.
Yeah. Christine again, Central Oregon Land Watch. I just had some general comments with the comparison between A and B. I think we are open to some changes to A in terms of which parcels are included. But generally support concept A over B. I think, it's aligned with what the community was presented with, what they were able to engage with, what they preferred due to several factors that we talked about last time. Also 30% of the total concept area right now is drawn. It's made up of large undeveloped lots that can be quick and efficient for urbanization and affordable housing that we need more urgently. There are properties that are unrestricted by CCNRs as we see, but there's also some properties that are under CCNRs. But I just wanted to say that they are somewhat of a barrier to development, but there are very few properties and property owners that are under these CCNRs, and therefore very few people would need to actually come together to agree over the next 20 years to change those agreements. And I guess another example, the city of Bend did their last major expansion in 2016. And one of the expansion areas was in the northeast, which is now Petrosa. You're familiar, it was pretty heavily parcelized and developed as rural residential land, and the city expected that area to develop last compared to all the other expansion areas, but it actually ended up being annexed and developed, like one of the first to be annexed and developed. And so I think just keeping in mind that these land challenges, these cons or barriers may not prove to be as much of a barrier once we're on the other side of this process, once people have actual options. And then the concept A also just has sufficient acreage to cover and accommodate the 20-year land need. And there's also several tools that the city can use to make sure that these, especially the affordable housing is met. And that's through annexation requirements, adopting more efficiency measures. As mentioned earlier, using those urban housing analysis numbers to guide those affordable housing levels.
and doing area planning in a way that creates working communities. And as I think we'll talk about it a little bit later too, we can adopt concept A by the end of the year, which is really exciting. And should we talk about the zoning.
Sure, I guess I just want to make sure that we've maybe exhausted the initial comments about the preferred alternative before we get to that point. It sounds like you guys got your question answered, at least initially, and maybe want some additional information to consider. No. Yeah. That good? Okay, remember that. So as you recall, the direction from the council at the last meeting was obviously to have an option A and option B, and to see how the rezone process plays out for McKenzie Meadows. So we recall that one of the only ways that we can consider the McKenzie Meadows properties is if they successfully rezone to from forest to something else. Mixed use agriculture is what they're going for. It's something that could put them, if successful, could put them into a priority one status. So they are under review right now with the county. They have the hearings officer hearing back in April, and they are in an open record situation right now where that's going to last I think 45 days or so, where new information can be received and responded to before the hearings officer makes a decision. And then my understanding from talking with the county planners is that they have 21 days to issue their decision after that. So it's possible that that could push it into June before we know what the hearings officer decision on that would be. And then it's required to go in front of the board as well. And I've been talking with the county planners. I think we've also been probably not accounted enough time for that process, because to be chance that decision will happen, they were going to an open record period there. They could push it out, and I understand that it has to be adopted by a first and second reading ordinance. So the timetable that we put on the schedule may be not completely accurate, so I could push that out into potentially September before we have a decision on the rezone. And then there's a 21-day period where that decision could be appealed. And we've heard from several entities that there's a good chance that appeal could happen, in which case they would not going to move it. Refuge Board of Appeals, which is a state process. And that according to talking with county officials, could potentially be 1 year to up to 3 years. It's not uncommon to have some of these things get tied up for quite a long time. So that schedule we have, we adopted UGB on the should be successful. April, September next year. That may be not accurate. We just don't know. You have to assume that it could take longer than that to reach that decision. And so in the intervening period, we could be doing a few things to continue our work, such as start with some of the framework for the area planning that we've said that we need to do. It's a little challenging to do it in much detail, not knowing exactly what the therapies are going to be. And we can work on some of the findings that we need to develop for the ultimate land use process and title that we'll need to go through. So there's some work that we can be done, but it's a good possibility that we might have to just kind of table this for quite some time, but we wait for the outcome of that process. So that's kind of high level review of the status of the zone. We also put in a schedule, a time frame for going without the McKenzie Meadows parcels, which would have us potentially adopting this at the end of this year. That's a little bit later than we initially had anticipated. That we'd be initially anticipated in September, adoption. We're running a little bit later, in that process, but, that's kind of the gist of where we're at, what we understand to be the options. So, any questions on those? Anything that I might not have added?
Just one thing that made it onto the slides you're seeing now, is rather than the magnet, doing some more public outreach. If the Kinsey Meadows village property is going to be part of the UGB kind of decision, I think it would be important to go back up to folks and say, things have changed somewhat, we've kept doing this work, and this is now something that you didn't see in the big open house in December, so it's a there would be time to do that kind of later in the summer.
And just to briefly address, your comment that you brought up or your email, suggestion about, whether we could, kind of move to other priority lands. Currently, from Kinsey Meadows is a priority 3 land. We're required to start with priority 1 lands first. And, if there's sufficient amount of land in our priority 1 lands, then we're required to look at those lands first. The only way we can go to lower priorities is if we make the case that we've exhausted all the priority 1 lands, that we can't, for one reason or another, we can't find enough needed land in our priority 1 lands that we could go on to priorities. We don't have any priority 2 lands, if you recall here. So the next step would be priority 3 lands, and we'd have to justify that to the state that we've gone through that process, and there are so many constraints that we just don't have enough exception lands. And our studies so far have said that we have a surplus of priority 1 lands. So it would be in our estimation, it would be a challenging case to make to the state to do so. Not impossible, but challenging.
And also at this time, would you update us, you've done more work about SB 37. Talk about that as an alternative to waiting for the zoning decision.
Matt, would you mind?
Sure. Yep. I'll give a summary of this. So there's kind of 2 primary criteria that would need to be satisfied for the city and property owners to be eligible for that kind of process. And that's a process that the city would have to initiate and then put out kind of a call for potential property owners to engage in that. And I'll say that in addition to the 2 criteria, I'm going to mention an area that came in via the Senate Bill 1537 process would have to be not zoned for farm or forest. So like if the McKinsey Meadows property were to come in as part of that kind of process after this UGB amendment, they would still need to be rezoned before that could happen. So that's an important thing to know. The 2 criteria, though, one would be the city would have to show that the land it had already brought into the UGB had comprehensive plan designations on it and was planned for future urban development, and that the city had plans for how to serve those areas with roads, water, and sewer facilities. So they'd have to sort of demonstrate that they had plans in place to serve those areas. And then the second thing is there's an eligibility criterion that has to do with the city being above a certain percentage of what are called severely rent burdened households. So the city has to show that it has that more than 25% of the households in the city are severely rent burdened, which means that they're spending more than 50% of their income on rent. So we looked into kind of both of those criterion to some degree. I'm sorry to say we don't have a super definitive answer, in part because the data, the census data related to the rent burdened criterion, is not, there's a big margin of error given the size of the city of Sisters. And so if you look at kind of that margin of error, Sisters potentially meets that criterion in terms of the percentage of rent burden households, but there's a big margin of error. So it could fall within and it could fall outside that. And for other communities in the state, the state actually does that analysis. They do that analysis for cities over a certain size, but not for sisters due to its size. So there would have to be some further discussion with the state about, does sisters meet that threshold or not? So that's one thing. We also looked at, are there examples of other communities that made the case that they had planned sufficiently for the areas already brought into the UGB to allow them to pursue a SB 1537 expansion. The city of Bend is one example where they did make that case. They said, yes, even though we still have a fair bit of land in the existing expansion areas that is not yet developed, we have water, sewer, and road plans for those expansion areas. They have comprehensive plan designations on them. So there would be some work the city would have to do towards that end to be able to make the case that those plans were in place. So in both cases, there's sort of a certain amount of work that would have to be done. It's not necessarily a slam dunk. And again, there would need to be some, I think we would need to have, and we can have some additional consultation with the state between now and, for instance, the meetings we're showing on the schedule about the rent burdened issue or data. But we're going to have get some more clarity on that from them, given the nature of the criterion and the data. So we've made some progress in sort of evaluating the potential for an SB 1537 expansion, but it's not super conclusive yet. So that's what I can tell you. And I don't know, Scott or Andrew, if you have anything to add, but we summarized that information in, I think, a memo that went to you in the packet as well.
Also curious about within 1537 is also section 58, which talks about swapping land, so you don't have to prove that you need more land, you can swap. And I'm wondering, and this was brought up by Mr. Walsh in his letter to the mayor today. Have you researched that at all relative to our particular situation? So that fast forward, we would go forward with the UGB without McKinsey Meadow, that there would be an opportunity in the future, maybe a year down the line, it was resolved that they got rezoned. And we could evaluate, hey, are there lands over on the northeast side in the Parkway area somewhere that we could grab a group of them and take them out of the UGB and put McKinsey Meadow in?
We have not really researched that option in a lot of detail. I think you'd still have the same situation. I think that section 58, I think those same criterion still apply, whether it's a swap or a one-time expansion. So, but I would want to clarify that in terms of going back and looking at the rule. But I don't think you'd necessarily get away from addressing those same issues. And if you were to do the swap, yeah, you'd have to sort of take out some land, probably take out land you just added. So you'd have to make the case for doing that as well. And the land that you brought in, I think, would still need to be zoned, non-farmer forest. So it would still need to get through the rezoning process subsequently. And that's the kind of the last thing I'll mention just about this schedule is I think, the weight on McKinsey Meadows rezone shows, potential adoption of a UGB, sometime next year. That's sort of best case scenario, frankly, because what we heard from the state is that the state won't acknowledge the expansion until any appeals have been resolved. So that could take a year, but it could easily take more depending on kind of how far the appeals went. So we're kind of showing you, here's what could happen, but it could take longer, I would say.
Scott, what do you recommend to us at this point in time? Or over the next few months? What you guys will do as consultants and how we should view this point in time? And the rezone process and.
I think it's
Decision
just to make a recommendation, kind of, at the last meeting, you know, there was general support for moving this out, or at least considering if there was enough merit that I think the group felt that for the reason that this parcel would really score pretty well is to give it some more time to see how the process moved. I think that went up to council, the council kind of agreed on that, but I think they wanted to revisit it at a certain time in May, which is what we have scheduled for them. To see if we have more information on the reason, which we're not going to have much more. Everyone's general information that we have, and see if the council still directs staff to wait for the result process to play out, or to proceed without it. So I think they're looking for your recommendation on what you want to do with that, so that they can help make a decision, and also kind of what changes to the preferred alternatives they will recommend. We've heard some good comments tonight, so I think the additional ones you have will be great. We'll pass over to Andrew and Matt to see if they want to add anything to that.
Can I say one thing? I've had personal experience in dealing with zone changes on a piece of property that was a lot less, much easier, and it took over 2 years. So that's pretty realistic assessment of, and if there was a way to do something with it after, you know, my view would be if we did continue and not, you know, otherwise we're going to be waiting a long time.
Can I give a council perspective possibly? Which is, we are really relying on you to give this recommendation. You have with other bodies, planning commission, you know, all of our other boards, we're looking for recommendations from you guys, so we really would like you guys to make that recommendation. We obviously, as a council, we have reversed things, changed processes, and we can discuss that at our meeting. But we really, the reason this steering committee was created was so we can get your input. The public speaking through you in a lot of ways, and they speak through us down the road. But that's why this committee was created. So feel free to speak your mind, make a tough decision if you can, and you know, that's what we're just here to help you through that process. We're not here to tell you what to do or what to think or what to say, for sure. The fair to say, America. Well, but maybe.
So we got all hands up.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Anna.
Oh, Morgan was, yes.
Okay, but Mayor.
Well, it was kind of a, I'm gonna talk about the elephant in the room in that, you know, there's a member of this committee that's heavily involved in this decision. And I'm just wondering, you know, it makes it, you know, it makes it a little awkward, right? To have, you know, an associate, you know, involved and having a decision. I'm not saying giving an answer to that, but just kind of acknowledging that I don't know if there's a way around this or mitigating for it. I think we're all nice and friendly people here and respectful, and so I think that could be a hurdle or a blessing. So.
And my intention was to support the group, but I will abstain from voting, obviously. But I do want to say, I'm seeing 30% affordable housing here, and I'm deeply saddened about affordable, because I think the number one thing in this community is to build a homes.
No black hat stuff.
No.
Thank you, Therese. I think what I want to come back to is actually what we heard from my watch earlier, which was that, we don't have time here, which means that we really need to concentrate on doing this right the first time. We're talking about the 20-year land supply. We got kids that won't be living here in 20 years. We got people who are very limited lives. And so we are making a decision for a generation right now. And so doing it right the first time is our responsibility, and it is incumbent upon us to be thoughtful about how this impacts the future of our community here. That's what soapbox part of I'm gonna say, but I guess mostly because this is such a broad timescale, we want to do it right the first time, so we don't have to come back to discuss a future land swap. Because that does take much more time, take much more money, take much more staff resources, and frankly, were that to occur, it would be a reflection of a shortfall in of this committee from my perspective. I believe really strongly, my day job informs this, I will really admit, but I believe really strongly that the south half of Barclay Meadow division is going to be very, very, very challenging to urbanize. That's 90 acres that are not candidly not really on the table for development realistically in the next 20 years. Why? Very expensive, very high value properties, multitude of property owners here. And because of that contiguous annexation, we really have to be able to find those and annexation is very low in order to make that happen. That's a huge challenge. So I just want to be mindful of the fact that granted the Mackenzie Meadow zone change may take some time. Using this timeline here as laid out, which is probably realistic. And I think it's, but we also know what the immediate impact is. That is right in our UGB, the high value, how highly it rates its adjacency to services. The big deal is infrastructure. I will also say that that's a major challenge with South End, producing infrastructure in that section there. So that's enough for me for right now. But I think if we can think about doing it right the first time, so that we don't find ourselves in a position in 5 years or 7 years where we are going through a very arduous process of a land swap and our UGB, it will be a future of our community. We can look to other cities and cities that are in the midst of that right now, and it is hard. They really were trying to build land swap since 2018. Legislative session. I don't want on us in that position, and we do have a little bit of a police solid.
I think.
Yeah, I want to bring it back to the process, which is we're supposed to be considering priority one lands. And at the end of the day, right now, we know there's property, we know where it wants to be incorporated with UGB, but truth is that land is not priority one. And we have, like, I can't remember the number right now, but thousands of priority one acre, or thousands of acres of priority one lands. And we have heard from people that own these properties that say they do want to be in UGB in this meadow area. So I think, if we're looking at a process that could delay us years, when we could move forward, I'm really leaning towards that. And seeing this map, you can see it's contiguous. It's connected to the current boundaries and places. And we need different kinds of land. And there's also really large parcels in this option A that could be developed and could be, when we do the next step and say it has to be 30% affordable or 40% affordable or whatever we want or whatever the city decides. Like those can also have affordable housing on them. So, I'm just gonna start the thing with that. I'm leaning towards option A and people can start saying what they're leaning towards.
But yeah, that's all I would say.
Right.
I think it's fair to say that no matter what the outcome of the decision, the county to rezone, appeals will take much longer than I think this, as you know, realistically points out. And I say this as someone who is as a renter in town, someone who wants desperately to see housing values, or not necessarily housing, but housing prices become somewhere that the working classes community can afford. And I agree that that the time is of the essence. With that said, I feel like option A is the better choice. Simply because, let me put a gentleman here from the South Barclay Meadows, who was talking about potentially bringing it into the UGB with I don't know if, and you never know when we talk about 20 years, 20 years of growth down the line, what that means look like, and who buys what, and attitudes change. So I would like to see us forge ahead and not necessarily be sitting on the sidelines watching. Cheesy analogy, but that's more or less how I feel.
I agree with you. Part of the marching order, we have to look exhaust priority one lands, and we have to look in close to that, to kind of what Anna said, and I think it's hard for us to justify sitting here waiting for McKinsey, maybe, that can be dealt with later on, however that happens. But right now, we're supposed to be looking at priority one lands until they're exhausted. Yes.
More maybe can I ask you a question? You say you have to do it right first time. Say more about that.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. I guess I allude to the potential of this land not being able to be developed or more at I don't know how folks, familiar folks are with how Southeast Bend is being developed right now. But there have been several UGB expansions that have been results of some very progressive, very proactive legislation that the city events capitalized on. There's master plans that are approved, there's subdivisions that are approved, and nothing is moving forward because of how difficult it is to get infrastructure out there, because there are so many parcels. And it requires the coordination of so many property owners. And so I see Barking as kind of a miniaturized version of that in many respects. And so I don't want us to be in a place where we're right at the cusp of being able to do and organize those properties, but because of as I mentioned, I value each individual property, the multitude of individual property owners that are out there, and the difficulty of annexing all of those properties due to their adjacency to the city limits. We could find ourselves back into a winter where we actually have land available in the UGB that just isn't developable for the local reason. And it's that exact situation that City of Roseburg is facing right now. And so they've essentially said, we have land in the UGB, we recognize that, but the LCD would need you to help us out here and conduct this land swap so that we can actually look so that is preventable. We set this outside of, reducing the UGB, set this proportion out again, expand the UGB in order to include much more easily developable land. And again, it's that land swap process that can be very arduous and time consuming. And I just, we've been doing this long enough. I don't want this all to come back through things people here in 5 years and have to redo things. Does that make sense?
Yes, I personally value your perspective a lot because of your experience in the job.
Yeah, it kind of boils down to it's all speculation. And I really think that we have to deal with what we know and what we have in hand, which is priority one versus priority three. And I do think that there may be some opportunities down the road
you know, if we want to look at McKenzie Meadows, if the zone change does happen, then I really think that April, September is not realistic. And then we're looking at a couple year process. And that there are going to be some objections and we're going to just let it move back. I feel that as much as you do about it would be to do the medicines. And I say that from experience as well, and being involved in this.
Susan or John on Zoom, you want to throw in anything?
Yeah, I can go first. I mean, I have concerns with the preferred alternative B and waiting for Mackenzie Meadows, just for a lot of the reasons that a lot of people have mentioned. I mean, it's just, it's so uncertain and the timing could really drag out, and it just feels like there's, you know, certainly it'd be interesting to hear like public, there just seems to be a lot of opposition, a lot of opposing viewpoints, and so it's messy. And it's tough to wait for it when you have, you know, other option with sufficient amount of land available, or priority one lands available. So I do, you know, prefer, you know, the preferred alternative A, although, you know, to my point earlier, I mean, would it be possible to consider another option, you know, basically expanding the Highway 126 properties, encompassing all of those, removing the Barclay Meadows first edition, and then including, I think it's Crosswind, you know, those other two properties, parcels up near the airport. I was kind of thinking if you changed alternative A or created another alternative to include those, I think you're going to get pretty close to, you know, our targeted gross and net acreage needed for the UGB expansion.
Yeah, Don, you have anything to add?
Hey, John.
Okay, there we go.
Oh, there you are.
Okay, sorry. You know, the two things that come up that concern me of not having some kind of a, you know, a planned timeline is that what position does that put the city in with their needs analysis? So maybe Scott could speak to that a little bit on timelines and, you know, analysis and appeals. So maybe Scott could speak to those two things.
John, your question was, how long can we wait before we have to maybe update our population projections and things of that nature? And I actually going to defer that one to Matt Hasty. I think, Matt, you had a good response the other day when we talked about that. How long can we wait before you know, that information will have to be updated?
Yeah, my understanding, and we'll confirm this as a follow-up, but my understanding is that the cities have essentially until they're able to use the existing numbers from Portland State University and whatever housing needs analyses they've adopted up to this point, until early 2027. And I can't remember the month, if it's January or if it's a different month, but after that point, they're required to use the new, not just they'll still use population projections coming from PSU, but they'll use the new housing need projections that are coming from the state, from the Department of it's the Oregon Employment Department, I believe, or OEA. Anyway, so at that point, like if we go past early 2027, then there will need to be an update to the analysis based on the numbers that come out of the state's housing projection process. So that there's that. I mean, that would mean that we would have to kind of go back and revisit the need numbers, and then that would impact the amount of land, you know, we could justify bringing in. So again, we can clarify the date for sure, but it's essentially early 2027 is my understanding. And then, you know, the appeals question, again, I kind of mentioned this earlier, but the state is the folks from the Department of Land Conservation and Development told us they really won't be able to acknowledge this until this gets through the appeals process, if they're assuming there's an appeals process. And we don't know for sure there will be one, but we have heard there's at least one organization that said they will appeal the rezone if it's approved by the county. So and you all, you know, have mentioned different timeframes of how long that could take, and you know, at least a year and probably more. I mean, I think the folks who have said, oh, it could take easily 2 years, I don't think that's off base. So that's what I would say to those things.
So we're gonna should we follow up with John to see if you have any follow-up comments? John, did that answer your question? And
Yeah,
did you have
that was great. Thank you.
I have a question, general question. Let's say magically the zoning did get approved. And we're fast forwarding 2.5 years. Or so. Plans have been drawn up, blah, blah, blah. Is there anything similar to an environmental impact report that's done when it's not pristine property, but newly developed property is going to be developed in Oregon?
Is it required for?
Yeah, or can the city require it?
No, not gonna.
Oregon doesn't have, so some states have environmental review processes that are sort of similar to the federal, you know, NEPA process, National Environmental Policy Act process, or EIS, Environmental Impact Statement process. California has a process similar to that. Washington does too. Oregon really doesn't. So I don't know exactly how that would play into what happens in 2.5 years, but Oregon does not have a process like that.
Well, I bring it up because a lot of people have weighed in with their view of environmental impacts, and
I mean, you
it would
know,
be nice to have an objective assessment.
yeah, I mean, we have looked at these properties in terms of where documented natural resources are, and so that has figured into the process that we've done. And yeah, I'm not going to say too much more about it than that. I mean,
Sensitive to wetlands, or jurisdictional wetlands that we would have to comply with federal law related to that. And there is no floodplain out there, but we've heard the possibility that there could be some mapping out in the floodplain in the future.
And if there is, then those portions of the property would be subject to you know, to environmental regulation by the city and the state, but not the entire property. You know, it would be the portions that are directly impacted by those resources, you know, in the same way that we're looking at those resources in other parts of the study area. We wouldn't say, oh, well, you know, there's a stream or wetlands running through a corner of the property, and therefore none of that property should be developed, or necessarily because that's not part of what we're required to look at in terms of the UGB criteria in that way. You know, we're required to look at the conditions on the ground in a specific area and on a particular property. So.
Check it out for people.
Right.
Yeah, I just need like 30 seconds.
Go.
Just a little history lesson. Going back in the time machine. I've been on council for 7 years, and the city's been working on this UGB expansion since at least 2020, probably before that. You know, pre-thoughts, and it was identified in the comp plan in 2021. So we're already pretty much at a 5-year mark here. So if anybody thinks we're making rash decisions, it couldn't be farther from the truth. This has been part of the plan for a long time. And it's just important to identify your future endings. That's just how it is. So don't feel bad about time.
Bill, can I just interrupt you for a second because we're over time? Do people who are here have another 5-10 minutes so we can probably wrap this up? Okay.
So I don't disagree with the logic here. I think it's great. I think we're missing something, but I think I'm in a house of mirrors, but I'm thinking we're not going to deliver 30% affordable housing. And I'm going to see it because I'm going to try to live for over 5 years. This is going to happen. We're going to deliver nothing. So I like everything everybody's saying here. You know, it makes sense on a logical point of view. I want you to know we're going to persevere. You know, we're going to go forward one way or another and try to deliver 30% affordable housing to this community, like it is not. And I know it's the right thing. And I want to apologize, but I think I got outside of the lines. I don't want to do that. I appreciate it. Okay. It's all due respect.
So. No, you have something.
No, I haven't been in the last 2 meetings, Yep. I haven't been able to attend the last 2 meetings, and so tonight I just really wanted to hear from community members, hear community comments, and I just really, trying to get back into the research and understanding what's before us to make a good executive decision, but I appreciate you asking.
Sure. But did you want to say something, Chris? Sure.
Is affordable housing not an option anywhere else but on the Mackenzie Meadow property?
No, it would be. That threshold would be. Required of anybody who was gonna build. Well, could be. It could be. Yes, it can be required.
It could happen somewhere else, but it's difficult, really difficult.
That's identified during the annexation process, which is a step later.
Okay, I'm sorry, I thought that this was already decided from this point forward, and it gets annexed, we would do 30%. Affordable.
No, that's the governor's goal. City council will identify that at a later time of this, during the annexation. Each property could be annexed differently depending on what its use is going to be. I think that there's an overall goal to hopefully hit that number. But city council has the final discretion during the annexation agreement of each property or group of properties.
Yeah, that comes into that area plan framework timeframe there. I do want to note as well, there are very few building developers that can deliver that 30%. So it is when it was on the table, it was a very valuable offer. That's just maybe a yeah.
Yeah, you're trying to get landowners to sell cheap. They don't want to sell. Their incentive is not to sell cheap.
And I will say, just to muddy the waters, I have in front of me, there is a bill making good progress in the state house right now to loosen up a lot of the super restrictive regulations around building condos in the state of Oregon. That's why I'm seeing condos as an affordable option. So that's in the mix. It's moving forward. It has a lot of support in the state house so far. So we don't know what's going to come out the end of the sausage grinder, but that has been an option for affordable housing that's just not been on the table for 10 to 20 years in the state of Oregon due to some restrictions. So that could really shift the conversation about building affordable, Palm said, smaller, condos, but there's still plenty of people who would be very happy to purchase a condo in various stages of life. So that's just out there just to make things more complex.
Thank you.
I am of the opinion, I hear from a lot of my colleagues that basically you're ready to go forward with already one thing that we have and not wait. Or not recommend to the city council and the planning commission that we wait any longer. At least not for the reason I'm waiting for the decision. I, however, do have a very personal experience dealing with people who are homeless, and I really have a deep regard for all the progress that Sisters has made in helping the unhoused. And I would hope that we would do everything we could to get more affordable housing into this town ASAP for a wide range of people, including the teachers and fire people and forest service workers, and people who work as baristas, some of whom live in the forest. So I would still hold for, let's just see what the hearings officer moves back with, and let's assess, around July, what new information has come to the table. But I'm also part of the group that's deciding this, so I'm also happy to with the group's general consensus is let's just go for it, and all signs point to the zoning just taking too long for so many people. I would totally accept that.
The comments?
So,
Great discussion.
Just about like thumbs up, thumbs down.
Well, I think most everybody has said. Right, Mel does not want to say, Bill is recusing himself. Susan, do you have any more to say at this point?
I do not.
So I think that the I'll never put it again. Well, he's really in the same boat still.
Or just to that point, just being a property owner within the boundary does not preclude you from participating in this process, because this is just a recommended body. It's not a final approved body. So I respect your thoughts there, but there's a need to do that.
Okay.
Because so we purposefully identified and created this committee to be have a range of diverse opinions and representation. So we knew that going in that this could be a possibility, and we came with the recognition that was okay. We're not making as much as you guys hope you have this power. You don't have that power, unfortunately. The council ultimately has the power, but they like Ruben said, put a lot of stock in what you guys say. So.
Well, and similarly, Mayor Letts and Councilman Green could state their opinion. They do not have to refuse. Is that accurate?
That's never said.
I would recommend that we go with an option 1B or B1, which would be, following what Morgan said about the potential problem with dealing with Barclay Middle South. Maybe we just took Barclay Middle North, Cross Wind Landing, the inner properties, and all the 126 properties. That would give us 250 acres, which is what we're trying to grab anyway. Not grab, that is bad for sorry, but to look at. And so that could stay in priority 1 lands, and it would probably, delay the issues with the Barclay Meadows first edition.
You state that.
Yes. Take Barclay Meadows North, Crosswind Landing, inner northeast properties, and 126 properties in its entirety. I think that pencils out at 258.
And exclude the.
And exclude Barclay Meadows first edition.
That's excluding quite a big chunk. Usually it's something. I think one thing I didn't bring up earlier was that the 126 properties, that there is a challenge there that it's the state highway. The other side of the highway will be farmlands. And ODOT has, is very particular for good reason on how they manage traffic and what can be built and not built based on turn lanes and speeds and things like that. So it's definitely not, developing that is not a home run. Just to keep that in mind. I mean, if the line below it to the south was also going to be included, then it's a different ballgame, right? But it won't be, so it complicates it. But are you just maybe hoping to just get one or the other and not worry too much about personalization yet at this point, or?
I guess we could kind of see if you guys could agree on a boundary, but at this late in the time, it's gonna be challenging. Or we could just pass on the whole slew of comments that we received today at the planning commission. Was I thinking about here for a while before it's gonna get confusing. This is boundary.
Quick question. Have you, at this point, or could you do a survey to get people who own these properties that were thinking of? Taking all these out, putting all these in, it's like people along 146, they may have strong opinions about whether or not they want whatever agreed to be annexed, for example.
We haven't necessarily talked about doing a survey, but what we have talked about is sending out letters to all the properties within these areas and maybe kind of draw a little wider so that it notifies everybody that their properties are being considered for the preferred alternative, and that's their invitation to participate in the process. I guess we could discuss that.
I don't know what the cost of versus together or.
How do you get results, with how you structure the question and making sure that all the information and how statistically valuable is this. We could talk about that, but we definitely did talk about making sure that there was a letter from the city to all the properties that notifying the properties of the consideration. And so that they would have we plan to do that before the joint meeting with the council and planning commission, so that they have an opportunity to send.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
I think all these different opinions are talking about at this point in the day, swapping out some properties and putting others in. It's best. So that's my opinion. So if we could have some input from any of those homeowners, and if there was silence, well, that tells me something too. That give them the opportunity.
Sure. And I've had some conversations with some of these property owners as well. Some of them in the Barclay Meadows first edition. These 3 or 4 potential property owners. I haven't talked to all of them are interested in being private. But so I think it would be great if they can instead of having put that in the now. But I've heard some interest there.
Okay. Thank you.
Just real quickly, Rick, is this more or less what you were talking about?
Yes,
Great.
but that's an additional information that the Barclay people are interested in. That,
Plus that kind of splits things up, and if you're trying to keep things connected, it's not
why only have to be connected to the city, not necessarily, it doesn't have to be contiguous.
Yeah.
But it has to be connected to the city already.
But I think we can look at this and, run a number like we've done with other examples for the upcoming planning commission and council.
Anything else, Dan?
So thanks for this conversation and appreciate your time. We will let you know when the next meeting is scheduled. We'll take a look at it. And hopefully that's it at that point. And so feel free to take a look. It wasn't predicated on Victor. No, I can't do it.
This concludes our meeting.
Well,